This meeting is being recorded.
Good evening, guys. Everyone, please check your audio and video settings, please. Both online and offline students. Am I audible? Am I visible? That's great. Okay. I think yesterday I was talking about spring bean scopes. Tell me total how many scopes are there? 6 are there. Total how many are there? 6 are there. What's the default scope? Okay. What's the mostly used scope? Right. Can you list out all the 6 scopes? Can you list out all the 6 scopes, my dear? Come on, everyone. Can you list out all the 6 scopes? You want enter key, singleton, prototype, request, session, application, lastly, WebSocket. Lastly, WebSocket. Okay. Okay, let us discuss about remaining scopes, guys. Those you know little bit of servlet programming, they enjoy remaining scopes. If you don't know also, no problem. Okay, but put some extra efforts if you don't know about servlet programming. Yeah, let's come to this. Here is my what? Paint, file, open. Okay, guys. Tell me here what is there? 617. What is that, guys? 6. 515 or 617? 515 Spring Core. Where is this? Stereotype annotations. What annotations, guys? So here are my 11th, 12th, March 12th. Okay, stereotype annotations and this one. First, let me open this file, guys. Tell me different scopes that are there, guys. Tell me different scopes that are there. Yes. What's the next scope that we have to discuss? @scope request, guys. This scope can be used only for Spring Beans of web application or distributed application. Nothing but Spring MVC and Spring REST applications, na? Yeah, Spring MVC is there for developing web applications. Spring REST application for developing web service based distributed application or not, guys. Okay. Web service based distributed application is nothing but web application plus plus. That's the reason web word is there in web service also. So distributed application also look like extension of what? Web application. Super, guys. This scope can be used only for Spring Bean of web application or distributed application. Spring MVC for web application. Spring REST for RESTful web services. Nothing but distributed application. Nothing but distributed applications. That's great. IOC container makes the servlet container to keep Spring Bean class object in what scope, guys? A request scope. That means a request attribute value which is specific to one request, where bean ID will be used as what? A request attribute, a name, and a Spring Bean class object will be used as what? A request attribute value. Request scope means one per each request. Anyhow, for every request, one request object will be created. Inside that object, this attribute will be added. Bean ID object, Spring Bean ID object. Are you getting my point there, guys? Come on, everyone. IOC container makes servlet container to keep Spring Bean class object in what? Request scope. That means request attribute value which is specific to one request, where Bean ID will be used as what? Request attribute name, and Spring Bean class object will be used as what? Request attribute. @component WMG, @scope request. Public class wish message generator. What is the internal code that will happen, boss? First of all, on the request object, it is calling which method? Set attribute method. What method, guys? Request dot set attribute, WMG. Bean ID as attribute name. Wish message generator class object reference. Wish message generator class object reference. This is my Bean ID. This is my what? Bean class object reference. Are you getting my point? Create Spring Bean class object on one per request basis. 10 requests are given. In 10 request objects will be created. In every request object, one copy of Spring Bean class object will be kept. So specific to each request or not, guys? Create and keep Spring Bean class object inside the request object, which is one per request basis. Which is what? One per request basis. Are you getting my point there, guys? Come on, everyone. Singleton prototype scopes can be used in both standalone applications and web applications. Request session application WebSocket scopes can be used only in what? Only in what? Web applications. Are you getting my point? If you want to store form data or front-end UI of web application, or distributed application in Spring Bean class object, which changes request to request, then prefer using what? Spring Bean class object in which scope, guys? Request. Prefer placing Spring Bean class object in which scope, guys? Request scope. Student registration form data, credit card or debit card form data, or person to person student registration information will change. Payment to payment card details will change. Person to person card details will change. That too you are dealing with what? Web application. Web application means request to request data changing means better to take request scope or not, guys? Better to take the support of what? Request scope. So simple theory, guys. What is there? You are developing Spring-based web application. Okay, the input data that is coming to web application changing request to request, but you want to keep that data in Spring Bean class object. Better to take the scope as what? A request scope. Better to take the scope as what? A request scope. Convinced or not, my dear? Come on, everyone. @scope session. What is there? @scope session. This scope can be used only in web application and RESTful. Okay. Yeah, what is session scope? One per browser. For all requests given by that browser, same session object will be used. Okay. If data is specific to one client, not for request, one entire client for different requests, then prefer putting data in what? Session scope. Okay, listen, login username password you take, guys. What is there? Login username password you take. When you look at the login username password, come on. When you look at the login username and password, okay, until sign out, sign into sign out, sign into sign out, sign into sign out. Okay, that data should be maintained across the multiple requests or not. Look at Gmail sign in, boss. Username password is given. When you click on inbox, actually username password is required. Is it asking? No. because data is there in session scope. Until we say sign out, same session will continue. It will be using across the multiple requests or not, guys? It will be using that data across the multiple requests or not, guys? I want reply, my dear. Come on. Super, guys. This scope can be used only in web apply. IOC container makes the servlet container to keep Spring Bean class object in HTTP session object as session attribute value. Nothing but one per browser software of each client mission basis or not, guys. One per request object. One per browser. What is there? Session object. One per browser. What is there, guys? Session object. Are you understanding my statement, guys? Come on, everyone. Okay. See, what is the scope? Session. Sir, you are not showing any practicals of it. Right now, we are learning which module? Core module. Using core module at max, what applications we can develop? Standalone applications we can develop. Can we develop the web applications, guys? No. That's why I cannot show practicals of what? Next four scopes. Only I can show practicals of what? Singleton and prototype scope. Okay, if you want, I will try to show those practicals, boss. At max, what happens? Error will come. It is not a web application. You cannot use these scopes. Like that, you will get error message or not, guys. Yeah, 515. Close all editors. What editors, guys? Close all editors. Close all editors. That's great. Okay, you go to any class, my dear. Yes, beans. Your vehicle.java is there. Okay, I am not using at the rate scope prototype. I'm planning to use what? At the rate scope. What is their session? At the rate session, right? Okay. Main, guys. What is there? Strategy DP test 1. What is there? Strategy DP test 1. Java application. Okay. Yeah, just a minute. Okay, scope request session, whatever it is. Scope request session, whatever it is. Yeah, strategy DP test 1. I think only container creation is done. Container creation is done. Okay, let's run the first one. Let's run the first one. We're trying to get the vehicle class object. Okay. No pre-instantiation for session scope beans, request scope beans. That's why no error come when you just create the container. But this time I am trying to get what? Yeah. CTX dot get bean vehicle. CTX dot get bean vehicle. Illegal state exception. No scope registered for scope name request. No scope registered for scope name request. Are you understanding my statement, guys? Come on, everyone. Super. No scope is registered for scope name request, guys. Yes, guys. Tell me here what is there? Browser to software application interaction. Website, browser to flipkart.com. Software application interaction to another software application interaction. Distributed application, nothing but RESTful application, right, guys? Okay, flipkart.com to Paytm distributed. Okay. Popular scopes in Java web application, leave it. Here, basically, it is trying to access session object or create session object, right? Okay, session dot set attribute. This is bean ID. This is my what? Spring Bean class object reference. This is bean ID. This is my what? Spring Bean class object reference. Okay. Tell me here what is there? Spring Bean class object reference. Simply what is there, guys? Spring Bean class object reference. Keep Spring Bean class object reference in the session object as what? Session attribute value. That means Spring Bean class object is specific to what? One browser software of client machine. One browser software of client machine. Storing login form data, username, password to Spring Bean class object. To what, guys? Spring Bean class object. Okay, Spring Bean class object needs to put Spring Bean in what scope, guys? Session scope. Needs to put Spring Bean in what scope, guys? Array, login information, sign in to sign out one session, right? And let us assume I want to maintain that data in what? Spring Bean. So better to take Spring Bean having what scope, guys? Session scope. Are very simple. Request object specific to one request. So request scope means specific to each request. Session object specific to one browser, one client. Specific to one browser or one client. Are you understanding my statement, guys? So indirectly, what, guys? Specific to one browser or one client. Okay, specific to one browser or one client. That means what, guys? Specific to one client. So if you want to keep a session of Spring Bean object in session scope, we have at the rate scope session or not, guys? Super boss. Okay. If form data is changing request to request, request scope Spring Bean. Okay, form data is changing user to user, client to client, session to session. Then you have to go for what? Session scope. Spring Bean in what scope, guys? Session scope. Okay. This scope can be used only in web applications and what? A RESTful application. What is the last one? Not last one. Okay, one more scope is there. At the rate scope application. Okay, everyone knows the request object is specific to each request. Session object is specific to each client. Come on. And application object, nothing but servlet context object. Specific to each web application. Common for entire web application. What do you say, guys? Specific to entire web application or not, guys? This scope can be used only in web application and what? RESTful application. IOC container makes the servlet container to keep Spring Bean class object in which scope, guys? Servlet context object as servlet context attribute value or application attribute value, which is one per entire web application. Servlet context object is one per web application, na boss? Irrespective of number of requests that are coming and irrespective of what, from which browser software those requests are coming, from which browser software those requests are coming. Convinced with me, my dear? Come on, everyone. Super, guys. Tell me here what is there. Keeps Spring Bean class object as application attribute having Bean ID as the attribute name and Spring Bean class object reference as what? Attribute value. Spring Bean class object reference as what? Attribute value. Convinced or not, boss? Come on, everyone. Okay, now listen. In a web application, in a web application, request object is specific to each request. Each request. Okay. Request object is specific to each request. Next one, session object is specific to each browser software. Application object is, what is there? What is there? Specific to one web application. Specific to an web application. It is specific to an web application or not, guys? Okay. This is what scope? Request to scope. This is what scope, guys? Come on, everyone. This is request scope. This is what scope, guys? Session scope. This is what scope, guys? Come on, everyone. Application scope. This is a request scope. This is session scope. This is what? Application scope. Comfortable, my dear? Come on, everyone. Super. Okay. Yeah, no, listen. I want to store admin email ID, admin username, this kind of detail, which is common for entire web application. That too in a Spring Bean. So better to take Spring Bean scope as application scope. Admin username, admin email ID, are they specific to one browser? No. One request? No. It is common for all requests coming from different browsers or not, guys? So it's a common and global data for entire web application or not, guys? In that situation, better to use the scope as what? Application scope. Check it out. At the rate component WMG, at the rate scope application. Servlet context SC is equal to, what is there? Get servlet context of. Super. SC dot add attribute WMG. This is my word. Wish message generator class object reference. What reference, guys? Wish message generator class object reference. If you want to store request count, users count of web application in Spring Bean class object, then better to put Spring Bean class object in which scope, guys? Application scope. Better to put Spring Bean class object in which scope, guys? Scope, my dear. Application scope. Super, guys. Request scope, one per each request. Request scope is what? One per each request. Session scope, one per each browser software. Application scope, one per web application. Request scope, one per each request. Session scope, one per each browser software. Application scope, one per web application. I hope you thoroughly convinced with my statements, guys. Okay, guys. Now listen. So here, you observe this. If Spring Bean state or data empty or fixed or shareable, then go for which scope, guys? If Spring Bean object state is empty, not there, fixed read-only state or shareable state, singleton. If Spring Bean state or data is varying state, time to time changing, boss, then prefer what? Prototype scope. If Spring Bean state is if Spring Bean state data is what? Form data. In a web application, it's a form data. Time to time data is changing. Request to request data is changing. Then prefer what, guys? Request scope. If Spring Bean state or data is login username password, then go for what scope, guys? Session scope. If Spring Bean state or data is common for what? Entire application, then go for what, guys? Application scope. Then simply go for what? Application scope. Convinced or not, guys? Come on. Request object is specific to each request. Okay, session object is specific to each browser software. Application object is specific to entire web application. So final conclusion I have given. Spring Bean object state is empty or fixed or shareable, singleton. So in a standalone application, Spring Bean object data is changing time to time, prototype scope. In a web application, Spring Bean object data is changing request to request scope. In a web application, Spring Bean object data is changing browser to browser, session scope. In a web application, Spring Bean object data is common for all the requests for all the browser software. Then what is there? Application scope. What is the scope, guys? What is the scope, my dear? Application scope. Are you getting my point there or not there? Super. Sir, I have a confusion. Singleton, one object for Spring Bean. Application, one object for Spring Bean in entire web application, right? Both are sounding one object. What is the difference between what? Singleton scope and application scope. Listen carefully. Application scope is one object for Spring Bean, irrespective of number of IOC containers you are taking in that web application. You take 200 IOC container in that. Generally, we don't take multiple IOC container. Sometimes we can take 2-3 IOC container in a single application. You take 2-3 IOC container in single application, then also IOC container creates single object for application scope Spring Bean. Same situation has come for singleton scope Spring Bean. For every container, one object will be created. There's a difference or not, guys? In a web application, okay, though we have multiple IOC container, the application scope Spring Bean object will be created only for one time. In the same situation, if you go for what? Singleton scope, the IOC, per IOC container, one Spring Bean class object will be created or not, guys? Per IOC container, one Spring Bean class object will be created or not, guys? Say something, my dear. I want reply, my dear. Come on, everyone. Okay. Yes. Shall we get into the discussion, guys? What is the difference between singleton scope, application scope in web application, guys? Singleton scope means one object for Spring Bean per bean ID with respect to each IOC container. Each IOC container. Are you getting my point, guys? Application scope means one object for Spring Bean per bean ID with respect to what? Entire web application. With respect to each IOC container, one object, singleton scope. For entire web application, one object. That is that application scope. If we create n IOC containers in one web application, then n objects will be created for singleton scope Spring Bean, and only one object will be created for what? Application scope Spring Bean. N objects will be created for singleton scope Spring Bean, and only one object will be created for what? Application scope Spring Bean. What do you say, guys? Super. Singleton scope Spring Bean class object is kept internal cache of IOC container to make it reusable within the IOC container, whereas the application scope Spring Bean class object is kept in what? Servlet context object to make it reusable for what? Entire web application. To make it reusable for what? Entire web application. Are you getting my point there, guys? To make it reusable for entire web application. Singleton scope can be used in both standalone applications and what? Web application. Whereas application scope can be used only in what? Web application. Can be used only in what? Web application. Are you getting my point there, guys? Come on, everyone. Singleton scope Spring Bean is specific to what? Each IOC container. Application scope Spring Bean is what? Specific to each web application. All the differences, boss. Okay, now listen. Let us assume I have a web application. Okay, I have a web application. I have a web application. In that one, how many IOC containers are there? Three IOC containers are there. How many are there? Three IOC container. Or if I take date class as a singleton scope Spring Bean, how many date class objects are created? Three. In first IOC container, one object, second IOC container, one object, third IOC container, one object. But if I make same date class object as a application scope Spring Bean, where it is created, guys, servlet context object for entire or not, guys. For entire web application, only one date class object is created or not, guys? Say something, my dear. I want reply, my dear. For entire web application, only one date class object is created or not created, boss? Super, guys. Okay, this is what we need to focus, guys. So one conclusion is singleton scope Spring Bean is specific to one IOC content. Okay. So what is there? Application scope is specific to entire web application. In a web application, you have 10 IOC containers. Okay, 10 number of objects will be created for singleton scope Spring Bean. Right, my dear? Come on. Super. Okay, if scope is what? Application scope. If scope is what? Application scope. In the entire web application inside the servlet context object, one object will be created. That is what? Date class object. That is simply what object, guys? Date class object. Are you comfortable, my dear? Come on, everyone. Super, guys. At the rate scope, what is there? WebSocket. At the rate scope, what is there, guys? WebSocket. Now we are trying to understand WebSocket scope, guys. Sir, we are able to feel these scopes when? We are able to feel these scopes practically only after developing what? Spring-based web application. Nothing but Spring MVC application, okay, or distributed application, that time only we can do. At the rate scope, what is there? WebSocket. What socket, guys? Protocol HTTP is what? Off duplex protocol. That means it supports two-way communication, but all operation takes place only when client, nothing but browser, initiates the request. Yeah, now listen. WebSocket protocol is built on the top of HTTP protocol. What is the difference between HTTP protocol and what? WebSocket protocol. HTTP protocol supports two-way communication, but it is called off-duplex protocol. What do you mean by that? Client can give request, server can give response. That's no doubt. I can give request to nareshit.com from browser, and nareshit.com can give response in the form of web page. Two-way communication is possible. That's why duplex is there. Why do you mean by off duplex? Very simple. Until client initiate something, nothing comes from server. Server thought of giving something. Can it give directly without asking for it? Not possible. Everything should be initiated by browser. Everything should be initiated by whom? Browser. Everything should be initiated by whom? Browser. Then only communication takes place now, my dear. Come on, everyone. Are you understanding my statement, guys? Come on. Protocol HTTP is off duplex protocol. That means it supports what? Two-way communication. What communication? But all operation takes place only when client initiate the request. What there? Initiate the request. Client browser, this side what? Web application. Client browser, this side what? Web application. Client generates the request, server gives the response. Again generate the request, again generate. Without asking, without asked by client, do you think web server generates some response back to client boss? Do you really think web server generates some response back to client my dear? I want reply, my dear. I want reply. Come on, everyone. Client, the one side what? Client. Another side what? Web application. Yeah. What is this? Generates the request to web application in web server. Generates the response. Again generates the request. Again generates the response. Server gives the data to client only when the client send the request to server. Only when the client sends the request to server. Convinced with me, my dear? Come on, everyone. Okay. Yeah, listen. Ultimate conclusion, two-way communication. But the problem is what? Until unless client demands something, nothing will be done by server. It's like a communication between project manager and okay employee. Project manager ask, then only he do. Again ask, again he do. Again ask, again he do. He don't do anything on his own. Like you people. Until say respond, respond, respond. Then only you will respond. Do you respond on your own without I ask? No, you are half duplex people, not full duplex people. This is the biggest problem with what, guys? HTTP protocol. It's a two-way communication, but everything begins only when browser initiate the process. Are you able to visualize it? Is there any website you did not ask anything, you got the results? You may say that as our cricket website is displaying live game score automatically. No, yeah. Browser is enabling auto refresh. It is internally generating requests at regular intervals, right? It is internally generating the request what? At regular intervals. Are you getting my point? Yeah. Request one, response one. Request two, response two. Protocol WebSocket WebSocket is full duplex protocol. That means it supports what? Two-way communication. And server can send data to client without getting request from client. Check it out. This is web application in web server, guys. Okay, that's good. Have a look on this. Here is my browser. Here is my web application in web server. Given request, response came up to this HTTP only. But interesting part is response to response 3 are coming from server. Though client has not generated request 1, request 2, request 3. Though client has not generated request 2, request 3. Come on, guys. Still require response are generated or not, guys? Still the responses are generated or not, guys? Did you realize that, my dear? Did you understand that, my dear? I want reply from you people. It's very useful in chatting applications. It is very, very useful in chatting applications or not, guys? Based on the connection established between client and server, browser and server, for the first request, the server can send multiple responses to client without getting any request from the client. Did you notice that? So can I call this one as a full duplex communication here? Can I call this one as a full duplex communication, guys? Come on. Okay, this is what? Off duplex communication. This is what, guys? Off duplex communication. Yeah. Here is my what, guys? Full duplex communication. That means after the server can give multiple responses, okay, to the client once it receives the request. Once it receives the initial request. That means, okay, certain responses can be given without generating any without getting any request. Without getting any request. Convinced, my dear? Got the point, my dear? I want reply, guys. Suitable for chatting application like Gmail chat, Facebook chat, and etc. In Spring programming, scope is equal to what, guys? WebSocket. Scope is equal to what, guys? Or scope is equal to WebSocket. Makes the IOC container to keep Spring Bean class object in WebSocket session that supports what? Full duplex communication. What duplication? Full duplex communication. What communication, guys? Full duplex communication. Are you getting my point there, guys? Come on, everyone. Yes, at the rate component WMG. At the rate scope WebSocket, right? Yeah. Yeah, season once I keep. Array, it will keep when WebSocket session that support full duplex communication. WebSocket session is equal to request dot get WebSocket session. Session dot set attribute. WMG is the bean ID. Okay, this is going to be bean ID. This is going to be bean ID. What is this, guys? Spring Bean class object reference or not, guys? Yeah, this is my bean ID. This is my, what is there? Spring Bean class object reference. What reference, guys? Spring Bean class object reference. The scope can be used only in web application which are running with which protocol? WebSocket protocol. WebSocket protocol is extension protocol to whom, guys? HTTP protocol. WebSocket protocol is extension protocol to which one, guys? Protocol HTTP. Protocol HTTP. Are you comfortable, my dear? Come on, everyone. What is the pre-instantiation and eager instantiation of what? Spring Bean. Already we discussed it now, boss. The moment IOC container is created, if Spring Bean class objects are created, that is called pre-instantiation. Okay, this pre-instantiation is there for every scope Spring, for every scope Spring Bean or what? For every scope Spring Bean or only for For every scope spring bean or only for what? Only for request scope that is there, guys. Okay, only for singleton scope that is there, guys, not for every scope. Only for singleton. Okay. Only for which scope it is, guys? Only for which scope it is possible, guys? Come on, everyone. Singleton. The IOC container is creating any Spring Bean class object during startup of IOC container. Only singleton scope Spring Bean supports what? Pre-instantiation of Spring Bean. That means the other scope Spring Beans do not support what? Pre-instantiation of singleton. At the moment IOC container is created, the Spring Bean class object will be registered or not, guys? Say something, my dear. I want reply, guys. Okay. What is the pre-instantiation and eager instantiation of what? Spring Bean. The moment IOC container is created, Spring Bean class object will be created. This pre-instantiation is there for any scope Spring Bean or only what? Singleton scope Spring Bean. That is there only for singleton scope Spring Bean. Not there for other scope Spring Bean, my dear. Come on, everyone. Super. Why there is pre-instantiation only for what? Singleton scope Spring Bean. Already I analyzed this point. Listen. Singleton means one object and there is a new chance of reusing that object. Other scope, many objects, na boss. If we keep one object of many objects in internal cache, come on, by creating object early in the container creation, is there any guarantee that object will be utilized? Because anyhow new objects will be created, they will be utilized. So already created object and kept in what? Internal cache will be wasted or not, guys? Okay, every festival you are purchasing new cloth. There is no meaning of what? Purchasing cloth keeping in storage for next 3 years. Because anyhow you are purchasing new clothes for every festival. There is no meaning of keeping new clothes in the locker. Okay, by saying that after few days you will use. There is no meaning in that, right? Singleton scope means one object. That there's a chance of reusing that object. That's why pre-instantiation and kept in internal cache. But remaining scope means what? Any number of objects can be created. If at all one object is created through pre-instantiation, is there any guarantee that object will be used again? No. That's why no pre-instantiation for what? Singleton scope Spring Bean. Come on. No pre-instantiation for what? Singleton scope Spring Bean. Is that clear, my dear? Come on, everyone. Okay. There is no pre-instantiation for what? Singleton scope Spring Bean. Clear, guys? Got the point, my dear? Super, guys. Tell me what is the story, guys? Why there is pre-instantiation only for singleton scope Spring Beans? The singleton scope Spring Beans are having pre-instantiation during IOC container startup. Will be maintained in the internal cache of IOC container, having reusability across the multiple CTX dot get bean calls and across the multiple injection. So the singleton scope Spring Beans are having pre-instantiation because the pre-instantiated objects will never be wasted. Moreover, they will be reused by keeping in the internal cache or not, guys. The other scope Spring Bean class objects will not be placed in internal cache of IOC container. That means there is no reusability for those objects because multiple objects will be created in what? Different scenarios. So no pre-instantiation is given for what? Other than singleton scope Spring Bean. Are you getting my point? Other than singleton scope Spring Bean. Are you getting my point there, guys? Come on. Other than singleton scope Spring Bean support what? Lazy instantiation. are very simple, Rababu. Many objects are created. So every time they are getting their required object. So the already created object Illiho will be wasted. That's why no pre-instantiation is enabled on what? Other than singleton scope Spring Bean. Are you getting my point there, guys? Come on. Yes. If target singleton scope Spring Bean is having prototype scope Spring Bean as what? Dependent. Can you tell me the prototype scope Spring Bean participate in pre-instantiation or not? Without seeing answer, you tell me the answer. Target Spring Bean is singleton. Dependent Spring Bean is prototype. Yes. Target Spring Bean is what? Singleton. Dependent Spring Bean is what? Okay. Anyhow, target Spring Bean is a singleton. It participate in pre-instantiation. Perfect. Participates or not, guys? Hmm. When instantiation is done, then only try to perform injection. Who is the dependent? Prototype. Though it is prototype, it also participate in pre-instantiation or not there. You want to go to US, you cannot go. Marry a girl who already got green card in US, na boss. So indirectly you are in US or not, guys. Or marry a boy who's already got green card in US. Indirectly you will become US citizen or not, guys. Same story over here. Prototype scope is dependent, but it is dependent to target singleton. Singleton participate in pre-instantiation. At that time only injection takes place. So indirectly prototype scope also will become what? Singleton scope Spring Bean indirectly, not directly. So indirectly prototype scope also participating in pre-instantiation or not. Okay, you want to feel that one practically, guys? Let's see, guys. Let's see everyone. Here is my SBeans vehicle.java. What is the scope of the target, guys? Singleton. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to petrol engine. I'm going to petrol engine. What is the scope of the dependent, guys? P engine. Yes, my dear. At the rate component P engine. This is taken as dependent, na boss? But I'm trying to take this one as what? At the rate scope. What is there? Prototype. At the rate scope prototype. File, close all editors. That's great. Tell me now here. Strategy DP test. I don't create any object, boss. I comment everything over here. I comment everything over here, right? Super. Strategy DP test. Run as Java application. Run as Java application. Here, pre-instantiation is happening or not happening? Pre-instantiation is, though actually petrol engine is what? Prototype. But to support injection activity on singleton scope target bean, it is also participating in pre-instantiation. Does it mean scope of the dependent change it to singleton? No. Scope is not changed. Scope is not changed. Scope is still what? Prototype only. Only to support injection on what? Singleton scope Spring Bean. It is changed to what? This level. Convinced, boss? The scope of prototype scope Spring Bean will not be changed to singleton scope, but prototype scope Spring Bean participates in what? Instantiation along with what? Pre-instantiation of singleton scope Spring Bean to complete what? Injection process on it. To complete what, guys? injection process on it. Are you understanding my statement, guys? Come on, everyone. To literally, solidly complete what? Injection process on it. How to disable pre-instantiation on singleton scope spring bean? Nothing but what? Enabling lazy instantiation. Okay. We can give at the rate lazy true, at the rate lazy true. Okay. You can. We cannot enable pre-instantiation on other than singleton scope spring bean. If you want to disable pre-instantiation, you have to enable lazy instantiation, na boss. Okay, this is very tricky question. Concentrate. I have 10 spring beans. How can we make only 5 spring beans participating in what? Pre-instantiation. Okay. Answer number one. Listen carefully. 10 beans are there. Take 5 beans as singleton scope spring beans. Another 5 beans as prototype scope spring beans. Come on, my dear. Take 5 beans as what? Singleton scope spring bean. Another 5 beans as what? Prototype scope spring beans. Are you getting my point there? 5 beans singleton. Another 5 beans prototype. First 5 beans. Next 5 beans. Yes or no, na boss? Okay, that's great. But make sure that dependent prototype scope spring bean. Prototype scope spring beans are not made as dependent to what? Singleton scope spring beans. Are not made as dependent to what? Singleton scope spring bean. Then what happened? Indirectly, prototype also participates in what, guys? Singleton. Yes, my dear? Okay, next one. Take all the 10 beans as singleton scope spring bean. But for 5 singleton scope spring bean, enable lazy instantiation. And make sure that these lazy instantiation enabled bean are not dependent to another 5 spring beans. Not dependent to another 5 spring bean. Bulb is glowing or not glowing? These are bit tricky questions, guys. Once again, listen the question and answer. I have 10 spring beans. I have 10 spring beans. Come on. But I want to see only 5 spring beans participating in what? Singleton scope spring bean. I want to see only 5 spring beans participating in what? Singleton scope. What should I do? 5 bean singleton, another 5 bean prototype. Make sure that prototype scope spring beans are not dependent to what? Singleton scope spring beans. Convinced, my dear? Got the clarity, my dear? I want reply, guys. Understood thoroughly, my dear? Got it? Super. Okay, next one. Take all the 10 beans as singleton. Okay, make last 5 beans enabled with lazy instantiate. And make sure that this lazy instance enabled spring bean are not dependent to what? Other 5 singleton scope spring bean. Other 5 singleton scope spring bean. Convinced, my dear? Come on, everyone. So if you inject other scope like request session dependent to singleton class like prototype, spring beans, though spring bean also got functionality of singleton indirect. It look like they got the functionality except pre-instantiation, nothing is same, guys. Definitely, any other scope if you inject to singleton, along with the singleton scope spring bean, they also pre-instantiated for injection support purpose, but their scope is not changed. Their scope is still request, their scope is still session. In remaining all aspect, original scope is continued. Only towards instantiation, they will be pre-instantiated. Okay. Take all 10 spring beans as singleton scope spring bean, but enable lazy true on 5 spring bean, but make sure that These 5 spring beans are not dependent to other 5 singleton scope spring bean. Other 5 singleton scope spring beans. Clear, boss? Come on, everyone. Take 5 spring beans as what? Singleton scope spring bean. And other 5 spring beans as what? Prototype scope spring bean. But make sure that prototype scope spring beans are not dependent to singleton scope spring beans. I hope you understood the basic answer, guys. All 10 singleton, 5 lazy instantiation. Make sure that lazy instantiated beans are injected to a target spring bean. Take 5 spring beans as what? Singleton scope spring bean. And other 5 spring beans as what? Prototype scope spring bean. But make sure that prototype scope spring beans are not dependent to singleton scope spring beans. Are you getting my point here, guys? Come on, everyone. My camera is not on today, na? Yeah, today camera is not on. Adjust, guys. Nothing problem. Okay, again, I have to call admin and other fellows. Yes, next one, what, guys? Stereotype annotation. Shall we start analyzing stereotype annotations one by one, guys? Yeah, let me say what are the stereotype annotation. Give me 1 minute, guys. Yeah, next what is there? Stereotype annotation. So what do you mean by stereotype? Tell me the English meaning of stereotype. Can I say boys dressing is stereotype dressing? They may feel the number of dresses they are wearing. At the end, they are wearing what? At the end, they are wearing pant and shirt, right? Boys dressing is stereotype dressing, no variety in that, right? Girls dressing is what? Not a stereotype dressing. They have variety of things to wear. Yes, na boss? They can wear what boys can wear, and they can wear what they can wear. Aisa no na? So they have a lot of options. So their dressing is not stereotype dressing. So what do you mean by stereotype annotation? Different annotations looking for the same purpose. Multiple annotation having the similar functionality with minor changes are called stereotype annotation. I have multiple annotation to make Java classes as Spring Bean with minor changes. And all these annotations together call as what? Stereotype annotation. So far we know only at the rate component to make user defined Java class as Spring Bean, right? Come on, guys. We have at the rate service, at the rate repository, at the rate controller, at the rate configuration. Yes, boss. We don't know, but there are also annotations to make Java classes as Spring Bean. At the rate REST controller, at the rate controller advice. Like this, few other annotations also there. They also can make Java class as Spring Bean, but they give additional facilities. They also give additional facilities. Are you getting my point there? They give extra facilities, additional facilities. Are you understanding my statement? They don't just give them, they give what? Additional facilities. Are you understanding my statement, boss? Come on, everyone. Okay, guys. The Spring supplied multiple annotations having similar functionalities are called stereotype annotation. That means all these annotations perform similar operation with minor changes. What changes, guys? Minor changes. The boys dressing is called stereotype annotation. Girls dressing is not called stereo. Is not called stereotype dressing. At the rate component makes the Java class as Spring Bean. At the rate service makes the Java class as Spring Bean comes service class with the advantage of transaction management. It will execute certain logics by applying what? Do everything or nothing principle. What principle, guys? Do everything or what? Nothing principle. That is called transaction management. What is that, guys? Transaction management. At the rate service. At the rate repository. Java class come, Spring Bean come, DAO class, where we can keep persistence logic. What's the advantages of annotation? Whatever exceptions that are raised, maybe Hibernate exception, JDBC exception, will be converted, translated to Spring or Spring Boot specific annotation exception. That's the advantage of at the rate repository. Makes the Java class as Spring Bean come DAO class, having ability to translate underlying persistence technology exception, JDBC Hibernate exceptions to JDBC hibernate exceptions too. Spring specific exception, guys. What exceptions, guys? Spring specific exceptions. At the rate controller makes the Java class as what? Spring Bean come web controller class, having the ability to take requests from what? Clients. At the rate configuration makes the Java class as what? Spring Bean come configuration class. What class, guys? Spring Bean come configuration class. There is one more annotation, that is what? At the rate REST controller. What is there, guys? At the rate controller advice. At the rate controller advice. Makes the Java class as okay. Spring Bean come advice class to handle the exception. To handle the raised exceptions. What, guys? To handle the raised exceptions and to handle the raised exceptions and to display exception related messages as the exception related messages as the okay user defined guiding message. User defined guiding. See, boss, observe very carefully. All these classes, all these annotations are similar annotation with minor changes. All these annotations are making Java classes as Spring Beans. Come on, my dear. Plus additional work, right? Okay. At the rate component, Java class as Spring Bean. Leave it. At the rate service, Java class as Spring Bean come service class. That means business logic is work. At the rate repository, Java class as Spring Bean come what class, guys? DAO class to have a persistence logic. At the rate controller, Java class as Spring Bean come web controller class. What, guys? Web controller class. What class, guys? Web controller class. What do you mean by web controller class, guys? Come on. Makes the Java class as Spring Bean come web controller class, having the ability to take the request from what? Clients. At the rate configuration makes the Java class as Spring Bean come configuration class. Spring Bean come. Yes. Next one. Controller advice makes the Java class as Spring Bean come. What is there? Advice class to handle the raised exception and to display exception related messages as what? User defined guiding messages. What messages, guys? User defined guiding messages. Are you comfortable, guys? Okay. See, the Java class that contains business logic in business methods is called service class. Business logic means dealing with what? Calculations, analyzation, validation. But don't think about normal application. Think about layered application. Layered application is all about what, guys? Keeping different logics in different classes or files and making them talking with each other or not, guys. Making them talking with each other, right? The Java class that contain persistence logic, code operation logic is called DAO class or repository class. What class, my dear? DAO class or repository. Okay, boss. Okay, now let me write more point. The Java class that controls all the activities of the applications, all the activities of the application is called controller class. All the activities of the controller is called controller class. Super. The Java class, okay, that handles the exceptions, handles the exceptions to display the generated exception related messages as the come on, guys, generated exception related messages as the non-technical guiding messages are called what, guys? Non-technical guiding messages is called controller advice class. What class, guys? What is their controller advice class? Simply what class, my dear? Controller advice class. Yes, at the rate component under this service, under this repository, under this controller, under this configuration, for all these things, component is the super annotation, my dear. All these annotations are extension of at the rate component because their basic work is making Java classes as Spring Beans or not, guys. Their basic work is making Java classes as Spring Beans or not, guys? Yeah, tell me here. What is there? At the rate, huh? At the rate controller advice. At the rate controller advice. Okay. All these stereotype annotations are very useful while developing layered applications in Spring and Spring Boot or not, guys? While developing Spring or Spring Boot based layered application, we take the support of these. What annotation? Stereotype annotation. We take the support of these stereotype annotations. Convinced with me, my dear? Come on. Super. In real projects, we develop projects as what? Layered application. That means we keep different logics in different classes and we make them participating in communication or not. In this situation, we take the support of these special stereotype annotation to make Java classes as what? Spring Beans come special classes of layered application. Spring Beans come special classes of the layered application. Are you understanding my statement, guys? Client application talking to controller, controller talking to service, service talking to DAO, DAO talking to database. DAO contains what logic? Persistence logic, JD. Service class contains what logic? Business logic. Controller contains what logic? Monitoring logic. Client application contains what logic? Presentation logic. We are keeping different logics in different classes or files. We are making them talking with each other or not, guys. If you want to take these classes as, these layers as Spring Beans, and it's better to use what? Regular component annotation or special annotations? Yeah, special annotation. To make Java class as Spring Bean come DAO class, can we use at the rate repository? Spring Bean come service class, can we use at the rate service? Spring Bean come controller class, can we use at the rate controller? Client application. For that one, we can use presentation logic or not, guys. At a client application, we only develop everything. That's why no need of any special annotation. In any Spring project of 100% code configuration, we pass inputs to IOC container by using what? Configuration class. Already we know what's the purpose of configuration class. When these many classes are there as user defined classes, to configure their package name, we need configuration class support or not, guys? So that means in real projects, all these stereotype annotations will be used regularly or not, made. Service repository controller configuration, all these annotations are extension of at the rate component annotation or not, guys? These annotations make Java classes as Spring Bean come special classes. What, guys? Spring Beans come special classes. In layered application, we take the classes of different layers as Spring Bean using what? Different stereotype annotation so that they in their injections can be done, so that injections can be done on those Spring Beans using at the rate auto void or not, guys. So that the injections, what, guys? The injections can be done on those Spring Beans using what? At the rate auto void annotation or not, guys? What annotation, guys? At the rate auto void annotation. Inject DAO class object to service class object. Once they are becoming Spring Bean, one object can be injected to another object. What do you say, guys? Come on, everyone. Okay. Next, inject service class object to controller class object. Client application gets controller class object by calling ctx.getBean method or not, guys? Are very simple. What's the advantage of developing layered application using Spring? What do you mean by layered application? Don't keep all logics in one class. Keep different logics in different classes. Make them talking with each other or not, guys. A layered application is like 4 BHK flat, guys. Standalone application with multiple logics in one class is like what? Bachelor row. Yes. If I take these layers as spring beans, what's the advantage? Number one, if I make them as spring bean, loading of all these classes, creation of objects, management of object, destruction of objects are taken care by OC container. You need not to create objects. And if I use at the rate auto void annotation effectively, one Spring Bean class object can be injected to what? Another Spring Bean class object nicely, na boss. One Spring Bean class object can be injected to what? Another Spring Bean class object nicely and effectively or not, guys? Nicely and effectively or not, guys? Come on, everyone. Super, guys. Inject DAO class object to service class object. Inject service class object to controller class object. Client application can get what? Controller class object using what? CTX dot get bean method. What method, guys? CTX dot get bean method. Are you comfortable, my dear? Come on, everyone. Got the clarity, my dear? So, so what's the advantage of developing layered application in Spring? If it is normal core Java or Servlet JSP, loading classes, creating object, assigning one object with another object, destroying object should be done by programmer manually, right? But if I develop the same application by using what? Spring. Okay. And if I make all these layer classes as what? Spring beans. Okay, now what's the advantages we are having, guys? Advantage number one. What is advantage number one, my dear? Come on. Loading classes, creating object, managing object taken care by Spring Bean. Spring IOC con. Assigning DAO class object to service, service to controller, taken care by Spring. And in client application, we can happily get the controller class object for management or not, guys. Happily can get the management or not, guys. Come on, everyone. Super, guys. Okay. Inject DAO class object to service class object. Service class object to controller class object. Client application gets controller object using ctx.getBean method or not, guys. Super, guys. Okay, fine. Shall we upload the material now? Yes. Come here. Where is this? Natraz. Where is this? Where is this? 5:30 p.m. Spring Core. Right click. File upload. What's your batch code, guys? 515. Here is what Spring 5. Sir, Google Classroom ID. Sorry, my dear. You are so late. Ask your admin. Shameless fellow. How many days back you are asking? How many days? After how many days you are asking Google ID? These many days, no reading, no practicals, huh? And you want to become software engineer. And I'm teaching Spring for you. Great. Okay. Great. Super great. You are great. I am great. Mahesh, where are you, man? What the hell you are doing these many days? March 7th class notes is not uploaded. 7th notes is not uploaded. 7th also same content it seems. Yes. 6th, 7th content only continued on 7th also if I am not wrong. Or I don't go by date, go by content. Okay. That's great. Fine. So when we meet in what? Tomorrow's class, we are going to talk more and more about what? Stereotype annotation and properties file. But one thing clear, until we develop the mini project, we are happy with at the red component, right? Sir, what's the advantage of going for this stereotype annotation? Number one, by seeing annotation, we can say it's not a normal Spring Bean, it's a special class. Number one. Number two, at the rate service take care of transaction management, execute logic by applying do everything or nothing principle. DAO improves the readability. It's not a normal class DAO class. Whatever exception that is generated internally, maybe JDBC exception, maybe Hibernate, that will be translated to Spring specific exception, now my dear. And the controller will monitor all the activities of the application or not. So don't think that these annotations are waste. They're definitely these annotations are what? Very, very useful, no doubt in that, right? Okay, guys. Tell me. Here is my 5:30 p.m. I already uploaded it seems. Yes. Right. Thank you guys. Have a nice time. We'll meet tomorrow and we will discuss